What does it mean to be humble? Moses certainly knew about his many great capabilities, and he never underestimated them. What it means to be humble is to fully recognize the gifts that one has, to fully understand the gifts that God has given each person, and then to devote those gifts in service of others. So what would a great business leader do? A great business leader would, I have many gifts as a great business leader, but it's all about the customer. It's all about my employees. It's all about my shareholders. It's not about me.
It's time to reinvent.
Welcome to the Lessons of Entrepreneurship, the journey of reinvention. Today I have a special guest for you, Mark Gerson. And Mark is a best-selling author. He's an entrepreneur. He's a philanthropist. I'm so excited to speak to you today, Mark. Please let us know who you are and what's your mission.
I'm an entrepreneur. I've started some companies, GLG, 3i members. I've also co-founded and chair 2 charities, United Hatzalah of Israel, which is the country's crowdsourced system of volunteer first response, and African Mission Healthcare, where we partner with Christian missionary doctors at Christian hospitals in Africa to provide clinical care, build infrastructure, do training, and sometimes hospital administration. And I have a book coming out, God willing, in June, called God Was Right, How Modern Social Science Proves the Torah is True.
I'm excited to speak to you because you blend faith-based wisdom and entrepreneurial strategy, which is what our audience is about. So let's dive into it, Mark. What is the number one biblical principle that you would say has radically changed the way that you view business?
The Torah, the 5 books of Moses from Genesis to Deuteronomy, offers entirely practical and highly relevant guidance on everything. And everything, of course, includes business and entrepreneurship. There's so many entrepreneurial principles that come right from the Torah, and I discuss many of them in God Was Right. I would say one of them, which applies to people in their capacities as entrepreneurs, but also as just business people or individuals, is the Torah's great promise in Deuteronomy. So the Torah really doesn't make guarantees. God doesn't like to make guarantees because if God says if you do X, then Y will happen. What happens if Y doesn't happen? And the Bible is not an ATM machine where if you say the right prayers or do the right things, you get out a certain outcome, because the Bible relies upon a notion of faith. But there is one guarantee in Deuteronomy, which is that if you give enthusiastically and generously to the poor, you will be blessed in all of your undertakings. So what the Bible is telling us is that giving philanthropically, giving charitably, is unlike giving anything else. Priscilla, if I give you my Diet Coke over here, I have one less Diet Coke and you have more. That's obvious. That's just logical. But what the Bible tells us is that if you give to charity, you will become wealthier. There's no notion of losing or sacrificing money when you give it to charities. That's certainly one notion that guides what my wife and I do as business people and as philanthropists. But there are so many entrepreneurial lessons that come right from the Torah. That's just one.
In your book, you speak about Moses and about his leadership in the Bible and offer a framework for modern entrepreneurs today. I think business leadership is one of those things as people are starting out that can be a little bit blurry, but I'd like for you to speak to that.
Sure. Priscilla, you brought up Moses, and what a great person to bring up. I write about him extensively, and God was right. Anyone who writes about the Bible is going to write about Moses extensively, and Moses offers lots of lessons for entrepreneurs. One was the one that I was teaching. I teach every Tuesday to primarily evangelical Christians through Eagle's Wings. On Tuesday, we were going through Exodus 18, and that's the story of Moses and his Gentile father-in-law, Jethro. And Moses, who is the great leader of the Jewish people, he had just brought us out of slavery in Egypt into the desert en route to the promised land. And Jethro comes from Midian, from the outside, both as a Gentile and he wasn't with the Jewish people during the Exodus. And he observes Moses. He observes Moses' leadership. And what he says to him is, quote, this is a very important line in the Bible, the thing that you do is not good. So what was the thing Moses was doing? Leading alone. Moses was judging all the cases by himself. Jethro, from the outside, has this perspective and wisdom to say you can't lead alone. He says it's not good for you and it's not good for the people. It's not good for anybody. And what does Moses do in response to receiving this critique? He changes his entire strategy. He institutes a system of intermediate judges. And this is such an important quality for an entrepreneur or any kind of leader, which is the ability and the willingness to listen to people no matter who they are and to accept the wisdom that they offer and to implement accordingly when the wisdom is right, like it was from Jethro's mouth. One of the many other things that we learn from Moses as entrepreneurs is the Bible tells us in the book of Numbers, Moses is the most humble man ever to live. Okay, so what does it mean to be humble? Moses certainly knew about his many great capabilities, and he never underestimated them. He had full confidence in himself to be a leader of the Jewish people through the desert, and he wanted to lead into the promised land. God doesn't let him, but he wanted to keep going. He knew he was a great leader. He knew he had the skills of a great leader. So what does it mean to be humble? What it means to be humble is to fully recognize the gifts that one has, to fully understand the gifts that God has given each person, and then to devote those gifts in service of others. So what would a great business leader do? A great business leader would say, I have many gifts as a great business leader, but it's all about the customer. It's all about my employees. It's all about my shareholders. It's not about me. So the great business leader who wants to follow Moses' example will fully acknowledge his skills and deploy them in service of his business and have no ego about it. Because Moses, like every character in the Bible, had his faults, but he had no ego. Such an important quality for any kind of leader, and particularly an entrepreneur.
I love the fact that Moses was considered to be the most humble, because a lot of times it's countercultural, because people think to lead, you've got to be overbearing almost, or the ego has to be so strong for you to be a good leader. And that being humble and that love for people that Moses had. What do you see commonly when you are speaking to entrepreneurs, especially in this leadership space, of certain pitfalls and things that are countercultural that people should be aware of?
I think a good entrepreneur, and we'll get to Isaac, because Isaac has a great lesson for entrepreneurs along the lines that you're talking about, Priscilla, but a great leader is humble like Moses, which is that if you don't fully understand your gifts, you can't deploy them for the service of God or the service of your enterprise. So you have to fully understand your strengths, your capabilities, appreciate them, and then devote them to somebody or something else. So Moses certainly did that. But as you said, Priscilla, he's not an overbearing leader. He's the opposite of an egotistical CEO. It's never about him. It's always about his mission. It's always about his people. It's always about his goal. We learn another lesson from a figure in the Bible who precedes Moses by hundreds of years. And this is Isaac. So we Jews, we have three patriarchs. And Isaac is the son of Abraham and the father of Jacob. So he's sandwiched in the middle. What's Isaac's role? Isaac's role is exactly that. He's a role player. Isaac is distinguished for digging his father's wells. And as entrepreneurs, I think we have to recognize the extraordinary importance that role players play in any organization. Isaac is a central figure in the Bible, in Jewish history, in the world. Isaac is completely central and totally important. And yet he was a role player. Abraham was a trailblazer. Jacob was a trailblazer. Isaac was not. Yet Isaac had an absolutely essential and indispensable role. And an entrepreneur who wants to follow the biblical wisdom in terms of building a business needs to understand Isaac's the quintessential role player, and he's deeply and rightly appreciated for it.
We're attracted to trailblazer. We're attracted to visionary.
Right.
We're attracted to pioneering. When people say role play, they don't typically associate it with entrepreneurship. Break it down a little bit more so that we understand.
Right. So the Abraham figure, the founder. Abraham's the founder, right? Abraham's the quintessential founder. Abraham couldn't do anything without Isaac. If Abraham doesn't have Isaac when Abraham's 100 and Sarah's 90, there's no Jewish people, no Christian people. We're not here. You absolutely need the role player. So Abraham is the quintessential trailblazing, visionary, founding CEO or entrepreneur. But he can't do anything without Isaac. So the great entrepreneur needs to realize and appreciate that he needs his Isaacs. He needs his role players. And he has to appreciate them. And he has to show his appreciation for them, as Abraham did for Isaac.
Thank you for that. It's so interesting. Since we started with Moses, sometimes we have this misconception about Moses because we know that he was brought up in the Egyptian palace. So he probably had the best training that a leader could have of that time. But when God calls him in, he says, I'm not able to speak, or
I'm not a man of words.
I'm not a man of words. Yes. Sometimes we get a little bit confused. We forget the training that he had as a leader. And we go through that as entrepreneurs, that feeling, I don't know whether it's doubt.
That's a great point. I think Moses' training in the palace, come to think of it, and I hadn't thought about it, Priscilla, before you brought it up, but his training in the palace was probably how not to be a leader. Because in a sense, the Pharaoh wasn't his boss. The Pharaoh was his step-grandfather. But he had a really bad example. And he learned from that bad example. And I think the lesson for entrepreneurs and leaders in other kinds of organizations is you can learn from good people and you can learn from bad people. You can learn from good leaders and you can learn from bad leaders. You can learn what to do and you can learn what not to do. Both are important.
Yeah, so true. Now, you also reference Abraham's influence on culture. And I wanted you maybe to explain that more because I was trying to think, are you talking modern culture or maybe explain that a little bit more?
Yeah. So glad you brought that up. So there's a chapter in the book on culture. There's several dozen different chapters on the book, all of which say, here's what the Bible says, here's what modern social science says, and sometimes here's where society's going. In the Bible and in modern society, there are really three kinds of culture. There's the culture of dignity, there's the victim culture, and there's the honor culture. And in the section on Abraham, I talked about specifically the honor culture. So the honor culture and the victim culture share something in common, which is every perceived slight or offense should be taken very seriously and should be reacted to immediately. So in a victim culture, when someone is offended or slighted, they rush to a third party. Maybe it's a campus HR person or whatever. In an honor culture, when someone feels slighted or offended, they fight. Abraham has a situation. So what does he do? The text tells us, I think it's Genesis 15, that Abraham and his herdsmen are having all kinds of problems with Lot and Lot's herdsmen. Now, Abraham was Lot's uncle. And Abraham, the text is very clear, is entirely responsible for Lot's great wealth. Okay, so what does Abraham do? Now, if Abraham were in the movie The Godfather, he would off his nephew. Okay? If Abraham were in any kind of honor culture, he would do something like that. Instead, what does Abraham do? Abraham is the quintessential leader of a dignity culture. And the leader of a dignity culture says, it's really not about me, it's about my mission. And I'm not going to get distracted by this offense or this slight. I'm not going to let it get to me because it's not about me, it's about my mission. So therefore, I'm not going to complain like people in a victim culture do, and I'm not going to fight like people in an honor culture do. I'm going to stay focused on my mission. So what does Abraham do? He says to Lot, we need to separate, because sometimes you need to separate. He said, we need to separate. You just pick where you want to go, and I'll go the other place. And so Abraham's able to maintain his dignity, which means he's able to persist in his vision and keep going on his journey because he doesn't get distracted by these personal slights against him. He's certainly not a victim, and he's also not an honor culture participant. He's a dignity culture participant, the quintessential dignity culture participant. And I think it's so important for all of us, whether we're entrepreneurs or not, to just realize these are three kinds of cultures. If we're in a victim culture or an honor culture, we can say, I want to follow the model of Abraham and others in the Torah and really go to a dignity culture, because that's the place where people are going to prosper the most financially and grow the most morally, is in that kind of dignity culture. Abraham sets a great example of how to respond to a slight. Don't let it get to you. Lot was giving plenty of slights to Abraham, but Abraham did not let it get to him. He stayed focused on his mission. He said to Lot, he didn't get offended. He said, you go wherever you want to go. I'll go where you don't want to go. And I'm going to keep going on my journey. And we know he doesn't get offended because Lot chooses a place that is immoral, but has fertile land, so it's rich. And Lot gets himself in all kinds of trouble there. He gets himself caught in the middle of a war between the 4 kings and the 5 kings. And what does Abraham do? Abraham marshals an army of 318 men and defeats 5 other armies to rescue his nephew Lot afterwards. So Abraham does not get offended.
Dignity culture. It's my first time hearing that phrase. And I'm wondering, what other characteristics are there of a dignity culture that you don't easily get offended, that you don't get taken off mission?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's such an important part of what God was writing about how we choose to live our lives. So in a dignity culture, you're not going to get offended easily. You're not going to complain or fight at any slight. You're going to take 100% responsibility. And that's crucial to it. And I have a chapter on that 100% responsibility. And I mentioned the chapter on culture as a facet of the dignity culture. So a man or woman of dignity takes responsibility. And the Torah teaches us how to take responsibility, which is take complete responsibility and then some. So one of the hallmarks of a dignity culture is when something bad or unfortunate happens, lots of people rush in to take responsibility. They all say, it's on me. The other guy says it's on me. The third guy says it's on me. So in that case, you have 300% responsibility. That's a dignity culture. So where does 100% responsibility, this facet of a dignity culture and something of great independent value, where does it exist? I think better than any place else in our society is in sports. All the great athletes and all the great coaches take 100% responsibility. I cited my friend Anthony Gonzalez, who served in Congress from Ohio, and before that he played wide receiver for the Indiana Colts. And Anthony said that when he or one of his teammates would come to the sideline and say, the safety held me, the coach would say, why'd you let him get close? Take responsibility. If you ran a little faster, he wouldn't be anywhere near you, wouldn't be able to hold you. Don't blame the ref. We see this all throughout sports. And why do we see? Because in sports, there's a winner and there's a loser. It's very clear. And the logic of sports leads the best coaches and the best athletes to take 100% responsibility, which is another crucial facet of the dignity culture.
I like that you tied it in with sports. I know some parts of the world don't really pay attention to soccer, but you see it a lot with soccer. The coach has got to take responsibility. The team has lost 3 times in a row, and he has to say, look, maybe I can't do this job. It seems harsh when you're comparing to the way we operate in other places.
That was the point I made, and God was right. Exactly what you said, Priscilla. When you compare it to how we operate in other places, take your example of this soccer coach, and soccer is a deeply underappreciated sport. You're right about that, but in America. But it's getting better. It's getting more popular. It's always been popular among kids, but now it's getting its professional recognition. Anyway, if a coach loses 3 games in a row, he might say, I'm not the right guy, or he might say, how can I do better? He's not going to blame his players. He's certainly not going to blame the ref. He's going to take it on himself. And if he doesn't, he's going to be fired. Because 100% responsibility is such an integral part of sports culture. Everyone accepts it, and you're absolutely right. Sports is very different than pretty much anything else in our culture, which is just 100% responsibility. It's something that the best participants take and the others follow the best.
Now, I'm interested to know, Mark, what has led you on this journey to seek these biblical principles and to share them? I know you mentioned that there's a group that you share with on a certain night. What's been the journey that's led you to that?
I started studying the Bible every day, probably 20 years ago or so at this point, and I realized what kind of book the Bible is. I realized the Bible is not a science book, it's not a history book, it's not a cookbook, it's a guidebook. And the guidance it offers is entirely practical and totally relevant in 2025 as in any other year in history. And then I was a reader and I guess you could say a student, but really no more or less than any person who is an active participant in the intellectual culture of just modern social science. Throughout the years, I had read Jonathan Haidt, Malcolm Gladwell, and those kinds of books. And then I started to study it. And what I realized in studying the Bible and studying modern social science was that the biblical author asked the same question that modern social science asked and are asking. Modern social science has effectively proven with social scientific certitude all of the claims relating to guidance made in the Bible. So it was with this realization after years of studying the Bible and then studying social science that I realized, wow, now we can assess with social scientific certitude, is the Bible true, false, or just a good book that's true in some places and not so true in other places? And I realized, no, it's true everywhere. Every claim the Bible makes in its function as a great guidebook has now been proven by modern social science. This is true on subjects ranging from 100% responsibility, which we talked about, to the importance of routine, to the importance of future orientation, to reframing, to what you should wear in the morning, to how many dates you should go on before you decide to get married. The most practical things, it's all in the Bible. And now it's all been validated by modern social science.
I'm looking forward to that. Mark, you mentioned routine, which a lot of entrepreneurs are like, okay, what is the right routine?
Yeah, the first step in routine is coming up with one. Right? And realizing that every successful person in every field has a routine. And when, as I did in God Was Right, you really study some of these most successful people, you realize their routines are really rigorous and never broken. All right, so first, what does the Bible say about it? So there was a famous contest in the Talmudic times about what's the most important biblical verse. One rabbi said one of the famous ones, another rabbi said another one of the famous ones, and then the third rabbi, Ben Pazi, said the most important verse in the Torah is, you shall sacrifice a lamb in the morning and one in the afternoon. And everyone says, by acclaim, he wins. Okay, so the most important verse in the Bible is sacrifice of lamb in the morning and lamb in the afternoon. That's not on most people's top 25. Okay, but that was number one. So why was it number one? Why did everyone agree it was number one? All the sages of the Talmud, why did they agree it was number one? Because it said the most important thing that you do is what you do every day. In other words, the most important thing about what we do is what is our routine. So the most important thing is a routine. And it's a biblical claim. And sure enough, modern social science has discovered that the keys to both succeeding and just living decently is coming up with a routine. For instance, when someone enters a drug rehab center, all the drug rehab centers, the first thing they do is they give the patient an extreme routine. And I looked at some of these routines. These routines are like every 15 minutes, here's what you're going to be doing. So what's the lesson from that? The lesson from that is that in order to function in the world, you need to have a routine. The first thing someone does in these treatment centers is they go into a strict routine. But it's also the secret of the best performers. So at the 2008 Olympics, the U.S. men's basketball team, I quoted Dwayne Wade on this, he was marveling at one guy, Kobe Bryant, for one reason, his routine. No matter where Kobe was, no matter where the team was playing, Kobe had a strict routine that began earlier than everybody else and ended later than everybody else. A routine full of hard work. And that's why he became one of the all-time greats. The lesson from the Bible is the most important thing you can do is establish a routine. And the lesson, particularly for entrepreneurs, is, establish a routine. It's so important, but there's a problem with routine. And the problem with routine is that routine can become routinized. And when something becomes routinized, then it becomes boring, which Rabbi Norman Lamb said is a poison to the soul. And it also leads us to make mistakes. So routines are both important and also, in a sense, perilous. And I quote some studies in the book about how when people become routinized, when they do something without thinking about it, all kinds of mistakes can happen. And this is areas ranging from medical mistakes to plane safety. So what we have to do is we have to make routines, create checklists, and then also insert newness into the routine. Because when you insert newness into the routine, then the routine is never going to be boring. It'll still be a routine, but it'll be interesting. And this, again, was in the Torah. So how's this in the Torah? Because the high priest on Yom Kippur, he had to bring 8 garments, and 4 of them he could only wear once. And then he had to wear new garments that looked exactly the same. So why is this? Is the high priest supposed to be a diva? Like he has to change before every performance? That can't be it. So what is it? It's saying that he has to have newness to his routine. His routine is you wear these clothes every Yom Kippur. But the Torah tells us subtly, insert newness into the routine. And when people insert newness into the routine, is consistently interesting and it's followed all the same. So how might one do this in their practical life? Let's say someone has a job. Okay, I have a routine. So in other words, let's get to the office at 8. Okay, I have to drive to the office every day to get there at 8 a.m. So far, so good. I got a routine to get in the office at 8 a.m. How am I going to get there? I'm going to drive the same way every day. Say no. Every Wednesday, drive a different way. Add newness into the routine. That's actually another example is car safety. When routine becomes routinized, people don't focus on the road, and that leads to accidents. And I have all the data on that in the book. You got to have the routine, but you got to have newness as a part of the routine. And this is also just a fact of Jewish religious experience. Every Friday night, the Jewish woman will light the Shabbat candles to usher in the Sabbath. But what the tradition tells her is, think of something different every time you light those same candles. Think of a different blessing. Think of a different prayer. Think of a different source of gratitude every time it's candles. So we have the routine of the lighting of the candles on Friday night, but there's newness because think of something new, think of something different that's responsive to what happened last week and what you want to happen next week.
Oh, I like that. I can see how the moment you let yourself get bored, you've lost the plot.
Exactly. And that's the risk of routine. The risk of routine is it becomes boring. So what does the Bible tell us to do and modern social science confirm? You got to have a routine, but you also have to keep it interesting. So how do you keep it interesting? Make newness a part of the routine. Not an exception to the routine, but part of the routine. So if it's Wednesday, it's a new root day or whatever it is. But what can I do that adds a newness to that routine?
So many practical things I think of when you say that. Even have your coffee, but go to a different place. You never know what creativity will be sparked by the fact that you went to a different place. Or try to do it differently. Test something else. As entrepreneurs, all these ideas.
I like your example about the coffee. Go to a different place. Or if you want to go to the same place, sit at a different place and sit at a different table in the same place. On Wednesday, you got to have a routine, but you got to make newness a part of the routine. And that's just a great lesson right from the Torah.
And to make you happy.
Crucial, because if you're bored, you're not happy. And that's why Rabbi Lamb called it a poison to the soul. But a routine is so important. I go through in the book the different routines that a lot of the great performers, certainly in sports, but also all the great writers had routines. There was a great interview that Stephen King gave to I think it was the New Yorker, and they asked him for his habits. He said, I write every day, except I think he said, like my birthday, Christmas, and 4th of July. Then he said, I lied. I write every day. So you got to have a routine, but you got to make newness a part of that routine.
Thank you so much. Could you share a principle you stumbled upon and then you found the biblical truths behind it?
Yeah, there are so many examples. Everyone should look to the Bible for guidance, from education to limits of education to how to educate. That's a good one. It didn't really apply to me personally, but it's certainly, the Bible will always at least make you think about things more. Okay. And the Bible will make you live a more intentional life. So in the chapter on education, the Bible tells us, if you have heard, you will hear. Okay, so what does that mean? What it means is it's explained by the Talmud, which says that the 101st time you learn something is completely different than the 100th time. So what does that mean? It means that learning is cumulative. If you have heard, if you know something, it will be easier to learn the next thing. So what's a great lesson for our education culture, our education policy? is that in order to achieve creative breakthroughs, how do we do it? You have to know a lot about the thing. So whatever the thing is. Who was the master of this? George Lucas. I quote this in the book. If you look at Star Wars and you analyze Star Wars, and I quoted someone who did, Star Wars incorporates themes from about 15 different movie types. George Lucas had basically understood every movie of any significance made up until Star Wars, and he's able to take that incredible knowledge and say, I'm going to take this from that kind of movie, the other thing from another kind of movie, and he compiled so many different things and made Star Wars. So I think one of the great lessons for educators, and every parent is an educator, one of the great lessons for educators is let's be sure our kids know a lot of things. And this idea, which may seem obvious, is really challenged by aspects of our educational system and some entire educational systems, which says that if you want a kid to be creative, the term is minimally guide him. In other words, don't have a sage on the stage, a teacher, have a guide by the side. I think that's totally wrong. If you want a kid to make creative breakthroughs as an adult, even a young adult, they have to know a ton. And in fact, there's a study I quote in the book that showed that Nobel Prize-winning scientists are significantly more likely to have a serious hobby than non-Nobel Prize-winning scientists. So why is that? Because when you know a ton about two different subjects, then you're able to say, oh, wait, this and that from different fields, if I combine them, then I might have something special. And that's creativity.
Thank you for that. I think that's going to leave people thinking a lot. This has been such a great conversation, Mark. Ideas are flying all over, and we look forward to your book. It's titled God Was Right, How Modern Social Sciences Proves the Torah is True. Now, where can people follow you, where they can learn more about where they can get the book?
Well, thank you. Yeah, they can go to godwasright.com, and I have a regular Substack column based on the book, but the book can be ordered from godwasright.com. It just links to Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And I'd love anyone who subscribes to the Substack, and go to Torah Tuesday, where I teach Bible in this very way, every Tuesday at noon Eastern time on Zoom through Eagle's Wings, which is a magnificent parachurch ministry of Christian Zionists and Philo-Semites and dear friends of my wife and mine. And every Tuesday, we're on at 12 o'clock Eastern time, so people can sign up for that, but it's all on godwasright.com.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Priscilla. What a great conversation.